Hi everybody, welcome to this TNITS and ESA webinar. It's 28th of April and we have prepared a wonderful program for you. Oh, the mouse is too quick. So what it's all about, what can you expect from this webinar? It's all about a new regulation on general safety regulation which was adopted in 2019. All new cars, vans, lorries and buses sold in Europe will have to be fitted as standard with a range of new vehicle safety features, such as overrideable intelligent speed assistance and automated emergency braking, which can detect pedestrians and cyclists. And this legislation is going to be starting in 2022. So I guess you're all aware about this. What is this webinar about? Well, it's indeed all about the role of the TNITS as an association and as a standard related to ISA. So what can you expect as a detailed contact? First of all, speakers will introduce you the reason why there is an ISA, intelligent speed adaptation or advice. What is the role of the TNITS in this? And some testimonies from Flanders. And linking the TNITS and ISA is then, of course, the Sherry. And you are welcome to, it's an interactive session. You are welcome to post questions in your question box. The next slide will guide you. And we will also have, let's say, an answering session after all the speakers have presented. My name is Frank Daams. I'm hosting this webinar. I'm Senior Manager at Eftico and the coordinator of TNITS Go, which is a CEF project for deployment of TNITS in 14 member states actually going on. Who are the speakers today? Well, we have a fantastic premium of speakers. First of all, Graziella Joost, Program Director of ETSC. Next, Professor Oliver Carson, Transport and Safety of the Leeds University. Frank Mutze, Policy and Project Officer of ETSC, and then Bert Boterberg. He's a team leader, ICT and Data Management at the Agency of Traffic and Roads at Flanders. And he is also our Vice President of the TNITS Association. Before we go on to the first speaker, there are some attention points related to GDPR. I guess since it's an interactive session and you are able to, let's say, pose questions, you must agree, or you agree by your attendance, that all the material to share with us is property of TNITS and legally property of Eftico and its partnership. So please be aware about this. This webinar is also going to be recorded, and this recording will be made publicly available. Be aware about this. You can formulate your questions in the question box, and this question box can be found in this nice webinar of online webinar thing, which is at your right side in the screen. Just type your questions and we will manage to answer them in our best way. This is going to be answered by the panel, and the panel are the speakers and some specialists that we have behind the curtains. Answers can come at the end of the speakers' presentations. So, are you ready? Then we go on to the first speaker, which is Graziella Joost. In the meantime, before the new screen appears, I'm going to introduce you, Graziella. You joined ETSC in 2005. You're now a program director at ETSC, responsible for overseeing a lot of projects. You also led, and that's quite important here, the advocacy campaign for the revision of the EU vehicle safety standards. And you represent ETSC in working groups on vehicle standards at the EU level and at the UNICE World Forum for Harmonization of Vehicle Regulations. We have also Oliver Carson joining you. Oliver is Professor of Transport Safety at the Institute for Transport Studies, University of Leeds. His major research focus is on driver interaction and safety with the new driver support systems. He led the UK national project on intelligent speed assistance, and he has acted as chair of the Road User Behaviour Working Party of PACTS, which is a Parliamentary Advisory Council. He was a member of the European Commission's GEAR 2030, as well as a member of the CITS platform. I think he's still. And he's an attendee at the meetings of UNICE and an editor-in-chief of the academic journal Cognition, Technology and Work. Thanks. Please, the two of you, go along.
Thank you very much, Frank. Can you all hear me? Yes? Thanks to all for joining us today. I'm Graziella Jost, and I will share this presentation with Professor Oliver Carsten. So those of you working on road safety are very aware of this. Driving too fast is still the #1 killer on EU roads. It's very simple. If we want to bring down the number of people killed or seriously injured on EU roads, we need to slow down. We need to tackle speed more effectively. I will present a few facts around speeding before handing over to Professor Oliver Carsten, who will explain how intelligent speed assistance works. First, a few words about ETSC. The European Transport Safety Council is a non-governmental organization based in Brussels. We gather 52 members organizations from across Europe and a pool of more than 200 experts contributing to ETSC positions and according to their areas of experience. And one of the experts is Oliver Carsten on ISA, for example. We have a variety of funders from the European Commission, our members, member states, and corporate sponsors. And the variety of funders guarantee our independence. We run a series of projects linked to the main risk factors on EU roads. And those projects' findings feed into our policy work, so we can then advocate for the highest level of safety in EU regulations. And why we do that? Sadly, in 2018, the last year available, 25,000 people lost their lives on EU roads. This is equivalent to 500 deaths a week happening on EU roads. Saying it another way, it's like an aircraft with no survivor crash happening every week in Europe on our roads. And many of those deaths could have been avoided if we had put in place stricter speed management measures. As Professor Rune Elvik from the Institute of Transport Economics in Norway says, speed remains a very important risk factor. It has a greater effect on the number of collisions and injury severity than almost all other known risk factors. I don't know what happened, but my computer froze now, so I can't go to the next. Yeah. We know a lot about speed and risks. This is a slide from the Swedish Transport Administration trying to illustrate the danger of driving on a rural road limited to 90 km/h. It's equivalent to driving along the cliff on the right, the picture on the right. We published last year a PIN flash, so it's a country report comparing speeding across the EU between member states. Speed is accountable for more than 30% of fatal collisions and is an aggravating factor in most collisions. These graphs illustrate what is the power model. If you work in road safety, you must be familiar with this graph. When the speed goes up, the risk of a pedestrian to be killed goes up, not linearly, but exponentially. So the probability of a pedestrian being killed in a collision with a passenger car going at 50 km/h is more than 5 times the risk with the same vehicle going at 30 km/h. This is why a growing number of cities across Europe are introducing or extending 30K zones, especially around schools and areas with many pedestrians and cyclists. Trouble is, enforcing 30K is a hard job, and people are not good at respecting 30K. And this is where intelligent speed assistance in particular can help. Again, sorry, computer doesn't want me to switch slides. I don't know what's happening.
It's also a very important drawing here, so.
I'm really sorry for this. I'm trying to switch slides, but it doesn't work. Computer doesn't respond. What should I do now? Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Can you see something?
Yes.
No.
Yes.
So sorry for that. People are speeding because, well, they can. Many countries are measuring speeds, average speeds, and those figures on this slide show you that speeding is common. We are all speeding, and especially common in urban areas and rural areas, less on motorway, contrary to popular beliefs. So between 35% and 75% of all drivers are above the speed limit on urban roads, and between 9% and 63% on rural roads. And this is not surprising because speeding on rural and urban roads is harder to enforce. There are less speed cameras, less police checks, the network is big. This is why we need a comprehensive set of measures to reduce speedings, and experience from fast progressing countries that have been able to reduce road deaths shows that there is not one single measure to reduce speeds for all road types. The measures 1 to 5 on the slides are measures that have been available for years. Many local authorities and countries are taking bold action, but collectively we can and must do better. And the safe system approach requires the road traffic management system to first limit the speeds to survivable levels. So the human body has limitation, and crashes at higher speeds won't be survivable. So that's the number one measure. Then traffic calming, self-explaining infrastructure such as speed humps or roundabouts can slow drivers down and help them stick to the speed limits. Enforcement and campaigns are of course important. Speed-related performance and indicators such as the one that I showed about the speed compliance are also important to know if countries measure effective. And last but not least, vehicle technologies such as intelligent speed assistance. As Frank mentioned at the beginning, last year the European Union has adopted new measures on vehicle safety for new vehicles sold on the EU market. And one of the technologies that all new vehicles will have to be fitted with as from 2022 is intelligent speed assistance. The European Commission has mandated a consultant, Transport Research Laboratory, to prepare the draft technical specifications, what we call a delegated act. This will set what kind of test intelligent speed assistance systems that car makers will fit on the cars, what kind of tests they will have to pass for type approval procedures. The regulation just gives some overview that Oliver will guide you through. Now, over to Oliver. Thank you.
Thank you, Graziella. Good afternoon, everybody. So ISA is actually an incredibly simple system. It's not technically all that challenging, and it's been tested a lot in real-world driving around the world. So in Asia, Australasia, North America, actually both the US and Canada, and in a whole series of trials across Europe, including the trials in the UK, which I led. So we have hundreds of thousands of kilometers of experience with the system. So how does it work? Well, first of all, the car needs to know what the speed limit is. So that's in the box top left, number one. And I'll go into that a bit more with a bit more detail. And then secondly, you can display the information on the dashboard. It's rather obvious you do that. So you tell the driver what the speed limit is. That's the first element in getting compliance. And I guess it should be noted that it's not always that easy for drivers to know what the speed limit is. There are a lot of confusing signs out there. There are signs that are missing. We don't actually necessarily provide the right infrastructure so that people can know what the speed limit is. And that's one way ISA can assist. And then second, the third element is to assist the driver. That's the assistance element. And the normal way that works is you have some kind of feedback, resistance on the accelerator pedal, or a throttle through which doesn't allow you to accelerate unless you kick down. So bottom left, you can see the driver can override the system by pushing harder on the accelerator. Now, this is not the only form of intelligent speed assistance, but it is the one that's envisaged by the legislation. Next slide, please.
I'm trying, Oliver. Sorry.
It's all right.
It will come eventually. I didn't want it to anticipate.
Down, the computer is already slowing down on speed.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so this is the estimate. Oh, it just went away again. But what the next slide shows is the with an overridable ISA, the assisting ISA, what you can achieve in terms of collisions and deaths. So it's an incredibly powerful system. And this goes back to the remark by Rune Elvik that about how much speed and speeding is related to crash risk. If we can get everybody across Europe complying with the speed limits, then we'll get a very large reduction in fatalities and serious collisions. And on top of that, we'll get benefits in energy consumption, because of course by speeding, excess speed, drivers waste fuel that they could save. So there's an immediate monetary reward. On the cost side, it can also be added that ISA is not an expensive system at all, that when you add it to a vehicle, especially as part of the kind of package that's envisaged by the European legislation, the additional cost, which is really a software cost of fitting ISA, is completely negligible. At the moment, Euro NCAP awards extra points to cars fitted with ISA, and that has resulted in quite a few manufacturers actually fitting the kind of system we're talking about. And we get a lot of support across the EU among road users and among drivers. And when we did our own study in the UK, the more that people used it, the more they became favorable to it. And they were most positive after we took it away from them and made them drive again without ISA. That's when they regretted not having it. So they really did see the benefit to them in terms of driving quality, complying with the rules, and so on. Next slide. So these are the kinds of vehicles that already have it. The Ford vehicles have something that's very, very similar to what's proposed in the legislation. The main difference is that at the moment, on almost, I think on every single manufacturer version, you have to deliberately switch on the ISA. It doesn't come on automatically when the car starts up, when you turn on the ignition, but that is the kind of system that will be required for EU new vehicles. The system will come on automatically at ignition on. The driver will have the opportunity to both to override it and to switch it off, particularly because of there may be some errors from the system. And that's why at the moment it's thought sensible to have the ability to disable the system or put it in standby. Next slide. So there is a film explaining how ISA works, and you can find that on the ETSC website. It actually has me driving in Leeds with an ISA system and noting how effective it is. It's driving with a Ford Galaxy, noting how effective it is. And I'm also driving on a road which, because there was excess speeding, was equipped with speed cameras, which sort of doubles the point about having ISA, because it avoids the driver getting a speeding ticket. And sometimes, of course, the driver, as I've said, might not even be aware of the speed limit, and they might not be aware actually that they're speeding because they don't notice that their speed has crept up. So they might want to comply, but they might not be able to. Okay, so how does ISA work? There's at the moment two real elements to knowing what the speed limit is. One is an image processing system, a camera reading the speed signs by the side of the road. The advantage of that is that it can even read dynamic signs posted by the road authority on variable message signs. For example, an example of that would be the UK smart motorway systems, where when the traffic builds up, the speeds are brought down, but people can still get speeding tickets if they exceed the speed limit, the new lower speed limit. Disadvantage of cameras reading signs are that signs can be missing, they can be hidden behind a tree, behind a shrub or whatever, so they may be obscured, they may have faded, and you can often do a drive in which you don't necessarily encounter a sign or a part of a drive. For example, you might come out of a supermarket car park after doing your grocery shopping, having turned on the ignition, and when you hit the street coming out of the car park, there may not necessarily be a speed sign at all. And then you could drive maybe for quite a distance in a large city, 10 kilometers or whatever, without ever encountering a sign. So that is handled by having a map combined with a GPS. The map has the speed limits encoded into it. GPS is already required equipment on all new cars and vans, thanks to eCall. The advantage of the map system, and here, of course, TN-ITS is very, very relevant. The advantage of the map system is that it can often be more reliable than sign information. It fills in the gaps in the signs. It helps drivers deal with ambiguous information and strange rules. The disadvantage is it can't replicate dynamic information from variable message signs. And of course, there's a requirement as speed limits are changed for the map to be kept up to date. And the third element, and we're not really going to talk about that, but that's a potential for the future, is that with connectivity, CITS, we can have dynamic information. So for example, in bad weather, the speeds could be brought down in a whole large piece of the road network, and that could link directly with an ISA system. In terms of the current technologies, the camera and the map, the Euro NCAP work and other consumer test results show that the combination, the fusion systems, provide the best information and the most reliable information to the driver. So camera plus map is better than either on its own. Next slide.
That was the last slide.
Okay, all right. So thank you very much. And now I guess it'll be Frank talking. I guess if people have questions, please feel free to ask them on the chat.
And they did, Oliver. So we come back to the questions after all the presentations. I also saw that you already answered some questions. That was a positive feedback from the audience at this moment. So we are quite a lot of people on online right now. Thanks for this comprehensive introduction on ISA. And now we get the part on the, let's say, the TNITS introduction by Bert Boterberg. He is also going to give a kind of testimonial from Flanders, how it works. So Bert is Master in Geography. He started in 2001 at the Agency for Roads and Traffic, so the AWV in Flanders, as a GIS coordinator. I assume it is Geographical Information Systems, and became team leader ICT and data management in 2012. He acts as a project leader of the traffic sign database for his agency, and he led the test site activities with the ROSAT project, which is a predecessor of TNITS. And actually is coordinating the TNITS implementation in Flanders under the TNITS Go project that I was talking about. And since 2019, he is also our Vice President of the TNITS platform. Welcome, Bert, and I leave the word to you.
Thank you, Frank. Welcome, everyone, on this session. So, as Frank said, I will tell you a bit more about TNITS and why it's important for ISA purposes. It's a fact that digital maps for all kinds of ITS services need to be highly up to date, especially when it concerns safety-related services such as ISA. This means it's a big challenge for the map providers for keeping their data and their maps and services up to date. But in fact, the road authorities are the ones who initiate all the changes in the field. So they are, in fact, the main source for these updates. Of course, if you want to receive these updates or want to capture these updates as a road authority, it means that you have to digitally store this information, and you have to maintain this information in a digital way. But it's a fact that many of the governments in Europe are at this moment increasingly digitizing. But there's a risk that they all use different data models at this moment. So it's important that we come to a common exchange format for this information. Now this exchange of information on changes in static road attributes is in fact the core business of TNITS. So we are focusing on what we call the base map layer data. So we are focusing on attributes that are more or less of a permanent nature. And our primary focus, in fact, were the speed limits, because they're very well linked to traffic safety. But we're also focusing on other restrictions and warning signs, which are regulated in the different member states in Europe. So if you take a look at the data chain, we are positioning TNITS between the road authorities, the road operators, and the map providers. So the TNITS the exchange, in fact, situates itself there. And we are looking at the base layer data for the maps when we're not focusing on the dynamic part of the data. That's something that DataX2 is addressing. So our focus, in fact, is the base layer data. And of course, it's also very important that the data chain from the map providers and the service providers to the road users is also set in place. But it's a fact that they are also making a lot of progress on getting incremental updates from the map providers to the road users. So that's very important to know. Now the TNITS association is coordinated by ERTICO. We have two types of members. We have road authorities in Europe, and we have the map providers. We, as an association, we support actively the European Union policy on data sharing. And we have, since December 2018, we have our own technical standard, which is the CNTS 17268. We are also providing implementation support towards our partners, and you can find all information about TNITS on the website, of course. The TNITS Go project is a project that started in January 2018. And we started with 20 partners spread across Europe. The focus of TNITS Go is to support the standardization and the implementation of TNITS services across Europe. We started with 15 member states, but we lost one along the way. So we have still 14 member states which are now implementing their service. And also part of the TNITS Go project is analyzing and setting up a first pilot of the feedback loop. The feedback loop, in fact, is providing feedback, or will provide feedback from the map providers back to the road authorities when they provide incremental updates towards the map provider. So you know what happened with your update or what didn't happen with your update. And of course, we are also expanding our service with new features, so we could support in the future new use cases. Now, some more information about the implementation in Flanders. In fact, Flanders is a part of Belgium. It's a regional authority in Belgium. We're the northern part of Belgium. And in Flanders, we are working with two entities of the Flemish government. So it's the Agency of Roads and Traffic, together with the Department of Mobility and Public Works, who work together in this project. We have a pilot TNITS service operational since 2016. And this service is fed by two data sources. The first one is the road database in Flanders, which is called the Wegenregister. It's in fact a database with all the centerline geometry for all the roads in Flanders, with a lot of static attributes, such as the form of way, the street name, the road number, also who is responsible for that part of the road network. So that's one source that we use for the service. And another one is the traffic sign database. So we have a central database with all the traffic signs in Flanders. And this database is also managed by the road authorities themselves. So they provide updates in the traffic sign database directly. As I said, we started with the first focus on the speed limit. So the pilot, the first TNITS pilot service contained the updates of the speed limits. We have the point feature, so the traffic signs themselves, but also we provide a map of Flanders with the speed limits as line features. So we have two different kinds of services there. But as a result of the TNITS Go project, we extended our service with the warning signs and restriction signs, which are displayed here in this slide. So we can provide new use cases concerning the height and the weight restrictions on certain parts of our road network. Now, something more about the activity of the road authorities in Flanders. So here you can see a map of Flanders with the local authorities. We have about 300 of them. And you can see in this map that a little bit more than half of them is active in the traffic sign database. So this map shows the activity in the traffic sign database in Flanders for the last years. It's important to say that they are all working on a voluntary basis in the system. So there's no legislation in place in Flanders. So they are all voluntarily working on the data updating part. And the last 6 months, we had a little bit more than 100,000 edits, to give you an idea of how many we have. You can see that certain cities and municipalities are striped. This means that they have their own software where they're updating the data, and this software is synchronizing the data on a regular basis with the central traffic sign database. Now, we see that the activity is growing, certainly the last months, because we launched a mobile app called Moving. And Moving provides us with the possibility of updating the traffic sign database in the field. So now it's for a few months now it's possible to add new traffic signs by field survey, or to change existing traffic signs or delete traffic signs that no longer assist in the field but were still in the database. Or you can simply validate the data on the field. If you see that the traffic sign is still in place, you can just check it and say that today I saw the traffic sign standing in this place, so you know that it's still present. And we're also looking at possibilities for artificial intelligence in combination with mobile mapping images to keep this database even more up to date. So as a conclusion, we believe that the road authorities in Flanders, but also in Europe, benefit from building a digital infrastructure and share updates in high frequency through TNITS. It's in fact a cost-effective way to support ISA, and by providing this updates through the TNITS service, we are providing valuable and fresh information to the road users, and by publishing that data, we are in fact making more use of existing data, and providing them as open data, of course, supports that also. And of course, by helping ISA, we increase traffic safety, which is of course an important goal, policy goal for all the member states in Europe. And by supporting the new use cases, we increase also the traffic livability, which is also a very important goal for all the member states and the road authorities in Europe. So that's, in short, my part of the presentation. So Frank, it's back to you, I think.
Yeah, welcome, Bert. Thanks for this introduction of TNITS, and I hope it clarifies a little bit about what TNITS is and what role it already plays. The next presentation is from Frank Mutzer, who is exactly going to focus on that. Frank joined the European Transport Safety Council (ETSC) as a policy and project officer in 2017. And in this organization, he's responsible for the policy work on connected and automated driving. He represents ETSC both at the EU and at the UNICE level, and he participates, of course, in the TNITS platform and manages the LEARN project, which aims to improve traffic safety and mobility education in Europe. So welcome, Frank, and go ahead.
Thank you. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. In this presentation, I will go into more detail into how TNITS can improve the accuracy of ISA. And in particular, I will look more closely into two requirements of the GSR related to speed limit information, and point out specific details and link how TNITS can be of assistance there. So the first requirement of ISA on the GSR that I will go into detail in is the one that states that the speed limit information should be obtained through the observation of road signs as well as infrastructure signals or map data. So I want to go into a little bit more detail into what the speed limit information is. Speed limits can be categorized into several categories, as you can see on the screen. And for the ISA system to perform well and also to comply with another requirement in the GSR, which is the avoidance and minimalization of the error rate, it is important that the ISA system is able to identify all of the speed limits that are explicitly or implicitly set by all the categories that are shown on the screen. And I will now go through each of these categories, shortly explaining what it is, but also explain how TNITS supported maps can help with the requirement for ISA systems to avoid using the wrong speed limits. Speed limits can be divided into two broad categories, predominantly of signs that sets them. On the one hand are the signs that explicitly portray a speed limit, and on the other hand are the signs that imply a certain speed limit. So starting with the explicit speed limits, you have the permanent and temporary speed signs. And looking at the permanent explicit speed signs, these are the classic examples of a speed sign. They indicate the speed limit with numerical values, such as the signs shown on screen setting the speed limit to 30 or even a whole zone for 30 kilometers an hour. These signs should be the easiest to recognize by ISA camera systems due to the simplicity. However, for the ISA delegated act, there will be some catches. Based on the midterm report of the study that Graciela mentioned, done by the Transport Research Laboratory, TRL, who are currently preparing the study, we can see that the camera systems would only be expected to recognize these signs in the following conditions. And that is only when the sign is in an adequate condition, only when the system has an unobstructed view of the sign, and only in good visual condition, meaning no blinding sunlight, no heavy rain or fog. So if we take one example of these, this is a speed sign that's obstructed by a branch of a tree, and the camera system would not be able, and also is not expected to pick up this sign. And the benefit of the maps that uses the TNITS facilities is that the ISA system would still know what the current speed limit is based on the map. In addition, there are some speed signs that present numerical limits, but which do not indicate the speed limit. For example, dimensions, such as limits for the width and height of the vehicle, or a limit for the weight of the vehicle, and these could be misinterpreted by the camera systems as speed signs. And the benefits of a map supported by TNITS information is that they still provide the correct speed limit and inform the ISA that no speed change is occurring. Going to the second broad category are the implicit speed signs. And the first category of implicit speed signs are the area-dependent ones. For example, entering a city implicitly means that the speed limit changes to 50, even though there is no explicit 50 sign. And this is similar for the signs when you exit a built-up area or the signs for motorways. And given the differences between the layouts of the signs indicating these area-dependent speed limits, and this is notably for city entry and exit, it's important that the ISA system is capable of recognizing all the different layouts in Europe. Another example of area-dependent speed limits are the residential areas, as shown on the screen. However, and in some European countries, these also imply a speed limit. For example, in the Netherlands, this sign implies a speed limit of 15 kilometers an hour. However, in Belgium, the same sign implies a speed limit of 20 kilometers an hour. It is therefore very important that the ISA system knows in which country it is. And I think by now the theme of my presentation on the benefits of a map supported by TNITS is clear, because also in this case, the map supported by TNS could help the ISA to determine which speed limit applies based on which country the vehicle is in. Moreover, there are signs that are relatively similar to implicit speed signs. Take, for example, the sign on the right-hand side of the screen that indicate the layout of the lanes. And in this case, it's rather similar to the residential sign. The most right arrow is the same as the house, which is also shaped like an arrow, or similar. The line that is going past the house is not unlike the middle arrow on the right side, and even the shape of the human could be mistaken for the arrow on the left side. TNITS also provides spatial information in addition to speed limit information and other data types. And in this particular case, the information provided by TNITS supported map confirms that there is indeed no speed limit change at this particular sign and that the current speed limit still applies. Another category of implicit speed limits are those based on road classification. For example, as on the screen, if one crosses from a city into a rural area, often the only sign at the end of is the end of the city limit. After that, the rural speed limit applies as is implied by the end of the city limit. The sign itself, however, does not give this speed limit information, as this is implicit from the road classification behind the sign. An example in which this becomes a little bit more complex is in Belgium, because depending on where in the country you are, the implicit speed limit is different. Flanders has a rural speed limit of 70 kilometers an hour, whereas in Wallonia, this is 90 kilometers an hour. And the benefit of DNITS is that speed limit information is provided separately for both regions, and therefore ensuring that the right speed limit is used. So to take stock, we currently have all these different speed limits already, and I will now present an example of how this may look in practice. So imagine we're driving from the south and you enter the city, and the city sign at the bottom of the screen implicitly sets the speed limit to 50. You, however, encounter a 40 km/h sign that explicitly sets the speed limit to 40. Following the street on the right, the speed limit would normally be reset to the default speed limit of 50 km/h. However, we encounter another explicit speed sign setting the speed to 50, thereby overriding the implicit speed limit of 50 km/h. The next sign we encounter is one that annuls the 40 km speed limit. So despite being an explicit sign, the speed limit is however set implicitly, as now the speed limit is set by the city entry sign from the beginning, which applies again. And then we drive out of town and the speed limit changes implicitly again. But this time the speed limit depends on the implicit speed limit that applies for the roads classification, which in this case is a speed limit of 90 km/h, as it is a rural road. The previous example showed how important it is that ISA systems can recognize both explicit and implicit speed limits. And map makers have estimated that around 60% of the speed limits in Europe are set implicitly, whereas 40% is set explicitly. This underlines the need for ISA systems to be able to recognize both implicit and explicit speed limits correctly. Both explicit and implicit speed limits can also be conditional. For example, speed limits can be changed during rainfall for specific vehicle categories and during specific times. And DNITS can provide information on all of these conditional speed limits as well. And the last category of speed limit information is based on road lane level. As you can see in the picture, there are, in this case, there are two different speed limits depending on which lane the vehicle is. On the left lanes, it's a speed limit of 50 km/h. On the right, it's a speed limit of 30 km/h. And again, the benefit of DNITS supported maps is that they can provide the correct speed limit per lane by providing this information to the ISO system. So to recap, all the different types of speed limits displayed on the screen need to be used by the ISO system in order for the system to have a system that avoids or minimizes the error rate. Going back to the performance requirements of ISA, this one concerns the performance targets to avoid or minimize the error rate of the system. One of the other benefits that DNITS brings to ISA is with regards to maintaining this performance of the system over time. So if we look at two specific examples in Europe from last year, first was France, that reduced the speed limit in rural areas from 90 km/h to 80 km/h. And in the Netherlands, a similar speed change was implemented on motorways. 100 km/h is allowed during the day, but depending on the motorway, then during the evening you're allowed to drive 120 or 130 km/h. The benefit of DNITS is that it can provide the updated speed limits directly to the map makers, who then in turn can update the maps for the ISA systems. So in summary, I hope this presentation showed to you that an ISA system that uses both a camera as well as a map, the fuse systems, are more accurate, reliable, and can handle more scenarios. Because maps in this case provide a very important backup function, which for safety critical features is of the utmost importance. And TNITS in turn contributes to all of this, because it facilitates the transmission of information on speed limit changes directly from the road authorities to the map makers. Thank you.
Hi Frank, thanks a lot. We are now going on the last but not least part of this webinar. There were a lot of people on the scene here, and they were very active, posing a lot of questions. So let me go to my screen and share just the presenters again. The most important question that I saw was, how do we get these presentations? And the answer is, we will send the presentations in an email back to you, to all registered audiences, with the links that were in, for instance, to the video of Professor Oliver Carson and some other information. So I get now a lot of questions, technical questions, and also opinions. Some of them are answered during the presentation, so thank you very well. Let me take off with, and I don't see my own screen anymore, but let me take off with a question to Oliver and maybe Graciela, but I think it's for Oliver. Oliver, you spoke about the practical test that drivers were doing across the world and also in the UK, and you were personally involved. That is seen in the movie. So if you invite those drivers, can I ask how the audience asks how they feel about this type of test and how they feel that is how it has changed their opinion during the test? And
okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So we had 80 drivers that we recruited. And they were from different parts of the country. So we had 2 areas of the country covered. We also had a combination of fleet drivers and private motorists, half and half. So we had quite a spread of motorists. And when we selected the drivers, we asked them some questionnaires in advance prior to their selection, particularly about their attitudes to speeding. So we deliberately picked drivers with a range of attitudes on speeding. They were, some of them wanted to comply with the speed limits, so they were a kind of speed compliant group. Some of them were non-compliant. They were speeding intenders, so they actually wanted to speed when they had the opportunity, and some people were rather neutral. So we didn't just get people who were favorable to ISA. So that's, I guess, important to note. And we asked them a series of questions at stages during the project about their attitudes towards the system. In particular, we asked a set of questionnaires that broke down into these 2 categories of usefulness and satisfaction. So usefulness is how much does a system help you? Satisfaction is how much does it achieve your personal goals? How nice do you find it, if you like? How satisfying do you find it? And the people consistently rated ISA as being useful. So they realized that it could help them, but they didn't necessarily rate it as positively on satisfaction. So maybe they got a little bit annoyed about being told, that they should improve their driving or whatever. But what was interesting about satisfaction is that it was slightly positive before they started. Then when they first got to ISA, it became slightly negative, and then it became more positive progressively. And it was most positive after they had the system taken away in the final month of driving, when we made them drive again without ISA, because we wanted to see whether there was any learning effect of driving with the ISA system. So they regretted losing it. And it also had an effect on their intention to speed. I mentioned that at the beginning of the answer. Sorry if this is a bit long, but one of the things was that driving with ISA changed people's intention to speed. It made them want to speed less. So it was a kind of medicine that you can give people to improve their driving. And it's really hard to change fundamental attitudes about things like speeding, as we found over the years. But just driving with a couple of months with, actually for 4 months with ISA, changed people's attitudes and made them want to obey the speed limits more. Perhaps because they realized that actually it wasn't that hard to do it, and it was good for their general driving performance.
Okay, thanks for the clear answer. Related to that, Graziella, there is a question from the audience. If we focus on passenger cars, question is, should we not start with buses as a natural traffic managers to calm traffic in urban roads? What's your opinion on that?
Well, ISA will be made mandatory thanks to GSA on all vehicle categories, so including buses, as from 2022 for new vehicle types, so a new model, and 2024 for current model, newly produced. So we're talking here about new vehicles only. It's not retrofitted. It's ISA fitted in factory, but yes, all new buses will have to be fitted with ISA. And what cities can do, they can go beyond, like London. London is an inspiration for other cities. The mayor of London has set a Vision Zero strategy, so he doesn't want anyone to be killed or seriously injured by a London bus or in a London bus. As a public services, he wants to put safety first. So he's required all operators of London public buses to fit an intelligent speed assistance that is above the requirements that will be set by the GSR. So he's asking the ISA to be made non-overridable except in an emergency. So if the driver feels he's threatened, his life is threatened, then there is an emergency button. But otherwise, TfL, the Transport for London, knows the speed limit the bus are taking on the roads, and so has digital maps with no error. And that allows London to set a non-overridable type of ISA for buses. And this is something that other cities, so buses, you can go further for public buses, fleet, for example. But yes, to answer, all new buses will be fitted with ISA, and that's a very good thing. And that means that once the fleet get renewed, but this will take time, of course. We know that on average, vehicles are 10 years older. But at some point in the EU, the whole fleet will be fitted with ISA.
Graziella, and related to that, there is a question from the audience to what type of vehicles it really holds, because people are aware that there are new cars coming even without this ISA in. So what is exactly then the regulation in 2022?
All new vehicle categories, all new buses, all new trucks, all new cars, all new vans, no exemption. Every new vehicle sold on the EU market, to enter the EU market, you will have to fit all new vehicles with intelligent speed assistance. It's very simple.
Okay, and very clear. Thanks a lot. Bert, people also looking to your slide where you mentioned also DATEX2. And they are aware that's for dynamic data, where TNITS stands for static data. So why two systems, and how is TNITS positioned towards DATEX?
Yeah, we had an interesting discussion at the end of last year about it with the DATEX2 people. So I think what we need to do is to align with the people of DATEX2 and to see where does TNITS stop and where DATEX2 taking over, because you have as Frank Mutze presented, you have conditions when certain speed limits or restrictions are in place, and they all could have a temporary dimension. But of course, you're getting more towards the dynamic parts of the data. So I think we need to align with them on how far we go in TNITS and where DATEX2 is taking over, or the other way around, of course.
Yeah, I can also add to that. Recently, it is recognized that it's of course a little bit out of the past that the two systems were developed in two separate projects, and definitely the EU and the Commission is aware about this and are doing an action to, let's say, in the next move to unify it in a general system architecture, a general digital system architecture that is being planned at this moment by the Commission, and it will make sure that there is consistency and harmonization and whatever, and complementary elements between DATEX and TNITS. That's for this information. Then question to Frank. You have spoken a lot about added value that maps can give towards, let's say, just recognition of cameras. And of course, the audience wants to know what is then exactly the accuracy that you can obtain with the camera-only system. And secondly, what will be the cost related to, let's say, unified system or system that has both maps and cameras on board? Can you elaborate on that? Right.
Yeah, so with regards to the performance of the cameras, this depends on the quality of the camera and the recognition software. And the question, but what was the second question?
The cost impact.
Yeah, so with regards to the cost, a good part about the GSR is that actually technologies are bundled. So for example, the camera system used by ISA is also used by other parts of the technologies required by the GSR. For example, lane keeping system uses the same camera as well, so you don't need to install two cameras. And therefore you get a reduced price if you look at the systems for the camera. And with regards to the costs for the maps, then in addition, I think we have experts behind the scenes on this who might be better placed to answer this particular question.
Is it possible that somebody answers this?
Can you hear me, Frank?
Yes, we do.
All right. So just a quick introduction. I'm Tom Hoenderop, part of HERE Technologies, one of the providers who are making and delivering maps. So when we talk about the cost of a map, I think it's important to realize that for the legislation coming, that GPS as such is already available in the vehicle as part of the eCall regulations, and also that just for making sure that it's complied with to the ISA achievements, that you don't need like a full-fledged map as such, right? So what we hear is that people usually confuse a map with automatically navigation. So if we talk about having a map in the vehicle to be able to support the examples that Frank was showing on where a camera would need to make interpretations or would not be able to understand what the speed limit actually is, then you need, of course, you need some geometry, so the roads, you need some information about in which country it is and what legislation is connected to that to derive this speed limit. But you don't need, in that sense, a full-fledged map to allow for turn-by-turn navigation. So that's an important thing to realize when we talk about having a map in the car and what that cost then would be. And what you also see is that the trend towards automated driving is of course also happening, and for that there is more data needed also in vehicles, which can come from maps. If you think, for instance, about electronic horizon, so what's around the hill or around the curve, so that the vehicle can already anticipate on what's coming. And of course, that information can also be used to give information, warnings to drivers when it is about speed limits in time, even if signs, for instance, cannot be recognized.
Indeed, Tom, and since you mentioned it, it can proactively give information and maybe also do something with the automatic car. So coming back to Oliver, a lot of questions raised on the behavior or what the feeling that the driver has. So can you explain how it really works for the driver? So when there is a speed indication coming up on your dashboard, does the car do more? And what is exactly what the driver experiences then? For instance, imagine that you go from 80 kilometers an hour to a sign that says 50 kilometers an hour. What happens then, and how does it react? What does the driver feel?
Okay. Well, of course, that depends to some extent on how the individual vehicle is engineered. But let's sort of think typically. What you might expect is the first thing that would happen is that the speed information, the speed limit sign on your dashboard would change when you go into the lower speed limit, into the lower zone. And ideally, and I guess this is based on our own experience in the UK, we think there should be a gentle beep just to inform the driver, provide the reassurance that the speed limit has changed, and that way the driver doesn't need to focus too much on the dashboard to see what's going on. They can just hear the beep, see the sign has changed with a quick glance, and then they understand what's going on. One could design a whole series of very strict systems to apply braking and whatever, but that's not envisaged. So what would happen is that essentially the acceleration capability of the vehicle would be limited. The vehicle would just naturally slow down, and unless the driver did do braking to make sure that they were in compliance right at the sign, then maybe it would take 100, 200 meters after passing the sign before they were in compliance. Beyond that location, once they were within the speed limit, then pushing gently on the accelerator would not allow them to accelerate faster than the speed limit. So they can't go beyond it unless they do some kind of rapid jerk of the accelerator pedal to kick through the limit.
So it's a lot related to the car that you buy. So it's the OEM that decides how it reacts. That's what I understand.
Yeah, the vehicle decides how it reacts, but of course the driver can decide to brake earlier, to get into compliance sooner, and of course that is very sensible. One could design, if one had a really good map and so on, a vehicle that would notice the sign ahead of time and start to slow down. And indeed, I think one manufacturer, VW, has already incorporated that feature in their ISA system, so that's doable. If you have the map, you don't have to wait until the camera sees the sign. So that's another advantage of having a map, to know, I mean, we just heard the mention of the electronic horizon, to know what's ahead and so on. So you can make the system more elaborate and actually more supportive if you want to.
Okay, thanks a lot. Frank, coming back to you. You had a slide where, in fact, you make an illusion about the accuracy. You have the slide where the camera says on this lane it is 80 and the other lane is 30, and apparently there's difficulty to distinguish what kind of speed limit is now really applicable on the lane level. And you make the kind of illusion that the GPS system will be more accurate on that. Is that right, or how should I interpret this? Right?
So, for example, the camera system at that point could pick up both the left-hand and the right-hand speed limit, and then it would get conflicting information, as in the slide that I showed, on whether it would be 30 kilometers an hour of 50 kilometers an hour. And if you have the map data with the speed limits based on a lane level, and then based on the GPS location, the system can then determine which of the two of the speed limits applies.
So it's about sensor fusion data, in fact, the
Exactly.
intelligence. Okay, thanks a lot. Bert, you did quite a wonderful job in implementing all this digital data in Flanders. Can you elaborate a little bit on the efforts that the road operator had to do to make this happen and to ensure this service? Was it a big effort? What kind of problems did you encounter? Please go ahead.
Yeah, I think it highly depends on the situation where you are in as a road authority or as a member state. In Flanders, we had a starting point with the traffic sign database, which was in place. So I think the biggest effort is in centralizing your data, in coming to a common data model for your member state or your region, and then of course providing a good working user interface on top of it, so all the road authorities could or can provide the necessary updates. But in Flanders we had most of it already in place, so for us it was not a big issue. We had to map our existing data model to the TNITS data model, and we had to set up a publication cloud server. So we had the advantage that we already had a centralized database. I think that's the biggest advantage that we had, and I think it's the biggest investment that you have to do is in getting all your data that could be in an analog way and to digitize it into a central database. I believe that's the biggest effort that is necessary.
Okay, and then maybe the final question related to the time that we are spending here, and thanks for the attention that you still have. This is a fantastic future question. What do you think that will happen? Do you think that there will be ever a time that the physical traffic signs are not needed anymore and that we just can live on digital maps? What's your vision on that? Bert, I think you're the best place to express this.
I think we still have a very long way to go until we reach that possible situation. So I won't dare to set a year on it.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot to the speakers, Graciela, Frank, Bert, and Oliver. And thanks to the expert interview from here. And thanks, of course, to you, audience, that you spent your time. I hope it was worth for you and that you learned a lot during this webinar. We will post the presentations as promised in an email back to you, where we also have the links to the videos and where we come back to most of the important questions that you have posted. Thanks a lot for this contribution, and thanks a lot for this interactivity.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. See you.